Once upon a time, there was a world filled with fairy tales, where there are stories which aren't all as they seem.
But you see, I have the other slipper.
Stories which have had their ends twisted, changed to suit the morals of today's society. But today we want to take you back to explore the world of original fairy tales.
I don't see how a world that makes such wonderful things could be bad.
Meet Jacob and Wilhelm Grimm, born in Hanau, Germany, in the 1700s. These two brothers would go on to write a collection of stories known as Kinder- und Heimatstern, or Children's Household Tales, which later became known as the Complete Brothers Grimm's Fairy Tales. But how come many people don't know about the Grimm brothers and their books? Have you heard of the Grimm's brothers?
Yes.
I know of them, yeah.
Yeah, they are like people that wrote books, like fairy tales.
Yes, I do.
Our research suggests that a third of people aged 16 to 35 don't know who the Grimm brothers are.
So, how is it that Disney are able to take these stories and make it into their own? This is all due to
copyright!
the Copyright Act of 1790 allows the Grimm brothers to have complete ownership of their stories for 30 years. So, to this day, anyone can use their stories.
Now allow us to tell you a story that you probably haven't heard before, Rapunzel.
When the king went into a witch's garden to pick some rampion for his dying wife, the witch allowed him to take some, as long as she could have the first child. So when the child was born, the witch took her away. Rapunzel grew up to be beautiful, and when she reached the age of 12, she was locked in her tower. After 2 years, the king's son came across the tower. After seeing how the witch got into the tower, and once she was gone, she called up to Rapunzel. Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down thy hair to me. Rapunzel threw down her hair to the prince, and he climbed up. The prince asked Rapunzel to be his wife, and she agrees to bring silk with him every time. But before he left, he managed to get Rapunzel pregnant. After Rapunzel accidentally told the witch about the prince, she waited until the prince arrived. When he came, she told him he would never see Rapunzel again. To this, he threw himself out the window and blinded him on thorn bush below. He then wandered the forest, living off nothing but the roots and berries, until one day Rapunzel found him, holding the twins that she gave birth to. They returned to his kingdom and lived happily ever after. The end.
What's your favourite Disney princess?
Rapunzel,
Why is she your favourite?
because she has long hair and she has a big castle, and that's it.
What do you think of that ending?
It's different and it's more adult than the kids' one.
To be honest with you, the ending of Rapunzel is... it's weird.
He deserves it, so it's good.
This version of Rapunzel is dark, but that's not to say that the Disney version itself isn't dark. In the 2010 film Tangled, Rapunzel is taken from her mother at birth for her magical powers by Mother Gothel. At 18, she escapes the tower with Flynn Rider and has a magical adventure. I should probably say spoilers, but at the end, Rapunzel is taken back to the tower by Mother Gothel. Flynn Rider goes back to save her, only to be stabbed by Mother Gothel. But in the good spirit of Disney, Flynn is saved by a magical tear and they live happily ever after.
And we aren't just going to stop at Rapunzel. Even Disney's most famous princesses were taken from the Brothers Grimm. But Disney aren't the only ones to have their own adaptation.
Time for another story. This one is called Ashipatel, or as you may know it, Cinderella. A young girl was distraught after the death of her mother, but after a year her father had married again, to a woman with 2 daughters. The daughters hated the young girl and forced her to work to earn her place, but even then she was forced to sleep in the ashes. For this, her evil stepsisters called her Cinderella. Cinderella didn't ask for much. Even when her stepsisters asked for dresses and pearls, all Cinderella wanted was a single twig which had taken her father's hat off. She planted this tree on her mother's grave and looked after it until it was big enough to sit under. One day the king announced there would be a festival to help find his son a wife. The stepsisters were allowed to go, but they would not allow Cinderella to follow. Cinderella's stepmom said she could go if she had done all her chores. But even then she couldn't go because she had nothing to wear. So they left for the festival, leaving Cinderella underneath the tree crying. The birds came down to Cinderella and gave her a dress made out of silver and gold, and slippers embroidered with silk and silver. She then went to the festival, and there the prince laid eyes on her and knew straight away that she was the one. They danced until Cinderella ran away and jumped into a pigeon house. The prince then is determined to find the fair maiden, but when the family come home, they find Cinderella underneath the mantelpiece. The prince found her shoe on the staircase and went around the kingdom to find out who it belonged to. He searched the kingdom far and wide, looking for his love. When he got to Cinderella's house, the ugly stepsisters cut off their toes and heels in order to fit inside the shoe, but they were caught out due to the blood all over the shoe. Cinderella is able to fit her foot inside the shoe, and at the wedding, the sisters try to share Cinderella's good fortune, but the birds peck out both their eyes for being wicked and for falsehood. And they all lived happily ever after. The end.
What do you think of this ending?
Lovely.
It's darker than Disney. I'll give you that. It's much darker than the Disney one.
Do you think if Disney had adopted the Grimm's version of the story, it would have been more interesting?
Honestly, Cinderella was a classic for Disney, so most people grew up with that version, whereas the Grimm's Brothers version wouldn't hold so much of an appeal.
I think it'd be more popular for, I don't know, possibly. I wouldn't say no. I don't think it would have. It wouldn't be a kids' film, so no.
I say that probably Disney will not show it in the first place, because even if it would be interesting to see a darker tone of it, I don't think Disney will show it to cinemas.
Now time for our last Grimm tale. This one is titled Little Snow White.
Once upon a time, there lived an evil queen who loved herself more than anything in the world. She had a magic mirror which hung in her room, and every night she would say, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who in this land is the fairest of them all?" To which the mirror replied, "You, my queen, are the fairest of them all." But little did the queen know that her beautiful stepdaughter Snow White was becoming the fairest of them all. One day, on Snow White's 7th birthday, the queen asked the mirror, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who in this land is the fairest of them all?" To which the mirror replied, "You, my queen, are fair, is true, but Snow White is 1,000 times fairer than you." The queen turned green with envy. In her rage, she ordered the huntsmen to take Snow White into the forest and kill her, and bring her Snow White's lungs and liver. The huntsman did what he was asked, and took Snow White into the forest, but he could not bring himself to kill her. She pleaded with him, saying she would run away. The huntsman let her, and brought back the organs of a passing boar. The queen was proud of the huntsman. She took the lungs and liver and boiled them with salt. She proceeded to eat what she thought was Snow White. But little did the queen know that Snow White was alive and had found a little house, and she went inside. Inside there was a table with 7 seats, 7 plates, 7 cups, 7 knives and forks, and 7 dinners laid out ready to be served, and 7 little beds lay against the wall. Snow White decided that she would stay for the night. The next morning, Snow White woke up to 7 faces staring at her from the base of the bed. They let her stay with them, as long as she cooked, cleaned, washed, sewed, and knitted for them. Meanwhile, in the castle, the queen uttered the words, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest in the land of them all?"
The mirror replied in a deep voice. You, my queen, are fair, is true, but Snow White, beyond the mountains with 7 dwarfs, is still 1,000 times fairer than you. The queen was furious. She decided to take matters into her own hands. She disguised herself as an old woman and went to the house, where she found Snow White. She sold her a corset and offered to lace it up, but she pulled the laces so tight Snow White passed out. The queen smiled and said to Snow White, "You used to be the most beautiful one." The dwarfs returned to find Snow White on the floor. They loosened the lace and saved Snow White. They told Snow White, "Don't let strangers in." But the next day, there was another knock at the door. An old woman with goods in her basket. Snow White let her in. The woman pulled out a comb. Snow White fell in love with it and let the woman brush her hair. But as soon as the comb touched her hair, she dropped down dead. The old woman revealed herself as the evil queen and crackled, "You are a specimen of beauty, now you are finished." The dwarfs came home late that night to find Snow White dead on the floor. They pulled out the comb from her hair and it reversed the spell. The dwarfs warned her again, "Don't let strangers in." The next day, the dwarfs left again, and once again the queen returned, this time with an apple. Once again, Snow White opened the door and took a bite out of the apple and dropped down dead. The dwarfs came home and found Snow White dead. The dwarfs were filled with grief, and they made a glass coffin so everyone could see her everlasting beauty. One day, a handsome prince was passing through the woods and came across Snow White. He asked if he could have Snow White so he could take care of her. The dwarfs agreed and let the prince take Snow White. But while the men carried the coffin, they tripped and the apple became dislodged from Snow White's throat. She came back to life. The prince was so happy he asked Snow White to be his wife. They invited the queen to their wedding and forced her to wear red, hot iron shoes until she dropped down dead. And they all lived happily ever after.
The ending of Snow White, though gruesome, is, as I said, the Grimm's brothers had a very twisted sense of honesty and justice. So it kind of depicts what they were like back then.
I prefer the Disney one. The True Love's Kiss one's nicer.
Even though in the Disney one she's pushed off a cliff.
It's quicker. It's a quicker way to go.
Well, I think it is different than the one Disney used, but it's, I would say, like the others, it's more adultery. It's trying to show what happens in both ways for the kids with a happy ending and a dark ending for the adults.
So, we now know that Disney have taken stories from Brothers Grimm and made them into their own. But they haven't just taken from these authors, but many others as well. Hans Christian Andersen is an author from Denmark who wrote popular fairy tales such as The Ugly Duckling, The Princess and the Pea, and The Snow Queen. Would you believe me if I told you that one of Disney's most popular modern fairy tales was based on Hans Christian Andersen's The Snow Queen, where a boy gets a piece of magic mirror stuck in his eye and heart? Hans Christian Andersen also created The Little Mermaid, which once again Disney twisted and made into their own. So what is the future for these tales? Are we likely to see any of them come out in cinemas soon? Or do we as an audience really want to see them? Or are we alright with the Disney versions?
Do you think that the Grimm brothers' books and stories should be made into more modern films instead of using the Disney versions?
Yes.
Most Grimm films that appear nowadays, though they're not Disney, they're really good.
What I say is that not do it by Disney, but if they do it by real life and actually get the story and characters right, then yes, I think they can be turned into a film.
So now you know how fairy tales really end.